there. All right, gang. Welcome back. We are back on the soapbox. And as promised, I think in the past few episodes, I wanted to hop back on and dive back into the life story. So the life story, we're on episode 3, and it's been really fun recapping, the life with you guys. And I talk a lot about it in different, forums in the past, but it's nice to sort of have one place where it's all going to live, and hopefully kickstart a few other projects I'm working on as well. But to recap where we were, last episode we ended it leaving the woods, right? So I broke down how I got shipped away, and then how I was out in Utah for 2 months, essentially just hiking every day and building trail and doing all sorts of things and learning different types of skills that I still have to this day. But it was the purpose of the woods was a stepping stone. So what that looked like was, a therapist would come out once a week and they would assess and evaluate, and then obviously they communicate with your parents. And then they would, the goal would be to go what they would call like a secondary school or something like that. And really what that was called was a therapeutic boarding school. So really, if you look at what the woods was, it was like a detox. It was a stripping of identity. It was a kind of a smack back to reality, but sort of not, right? It was this extreme one end of the spectrum where you got ripped from your current reality into this, very different world that stripped you of most of what you were used to doing. And then from there, in a pretty raw and vulnerable state, then going to what they would, what's dubbed the therapeutic boarding school. And that's what was next for me. And I'll just never forget, leaving the woods. My dad came out, and he spent the night with me out in the woods, which was pretty cool. I believe I made it to what they called air phase, which was you had to it's hard to get to, but you had different privileges, right? So I remember you got a crazy creek, which is like a seat that you camp with. And I remember that was one of the privileges. So sitting in that was such a badge of honor. I think I held on to that thing for 7 years. I just never wanted to give it away because, they gave it to you, which is pretty cool. But anyway, we drove out of there, and I just remember listening to music for the first time in 2 months. And this little things like that you really learn, that you take for granted in your day to day, is that something, and I'll never forget those things, obviously eating a meal that's actually cooked, and showering, because we had to shower with water in a what they called a billy, just a little bucket. So there was all these things that you learn that you take for granted in day-to-day life, and I don't think it's a bad thing that you do, but I just remember that, listening to music and just some of the normal comforts that we enjoy every day. And then I had to travel to Virginia because my next step was to go to Carlbrook, and really had no idea what that was, but what I did know is I wasn't going home. I wasn't going to be going home for a long time, and which at that point, I was done being defiant with it, and more okay, I succumbed to the process. I knew that I didn't really have a choice here. And now you're 2 months removed. Things that were challenging, that sort of maybe helped me, is that I only got a letter from one or two, I think just one person who I still talk to now, my buddy. But I realized, okay, maybe the people I was hanging out with you weren't that good of people, just because they never reached out. And so maybe that made that decision a little easier. It was was it just a surface level type of thing? And I don't know, but I definitely didn't resist or fight it. We traveled, and I remember staying in a hotel, and we flew, and then stayed in a hotel in Virginia. These are just little things that I remember, listening to music, and then driving to the school, and I had to get all these things for this school. There was a dress code and whatever, and it was already, my dad had already gotten all that for me. It was I didn't have to deal with any of it. And I think I remember driving up it was in I believe it was Halifax, Virginia. For those of you that are unaware, because I was until I was there, and I don't think most people would have a reason to be aware of that place, but it's the middle of nowhere. And it's like country, and it's Virginia and backcountry. And you drive down this long road with a couple houses and a lot of land and just the kind of, stuff. And you get to the school, and it's this sort of sweeping campus. There's a beautiful pond with like a little bridge, and there's just like this nice stone building, then another carriage house, and then up on a hill there's this really big main building with these big columns, very like plantation-esque type of architecture. There's dirt roads, and then the bridge, and then there's some woods, and to the other side, so it looks there's what they would call mods, and they're temporary, and that's where the classrooms were on the other side. So you had one side of the water, which was really nice, like buildings, which you could tell was like where people, the commune areas, some of the offices, the common areas, and then the other side, there's some field that you could play sports on. So it was like, okay, looked like a school, right? Hopefully it described a campus. And then, so we get there, and you sort of this sort of like in doc phase where you're kind of learning everything, and they're asking you questions. I'm already accepted into the school. I'm already there. And then as it breaks down, you kind of learn. It's not like, they don't never lay anything out for you, but if you're perceptive enough, you kind of figure out, okay, I'm going to be here for 2 years. That was pretty clear. Graduation date was already set, so like you come into a class, and a class, like the class kind of matriculates in over the course of a couple months, but that class all graduates at the same time. It was 2 years away. That was a lot to handle. And I would see my family 5 times across 2 years. And you would leave campus no more than that in 5 years. Picking up on that, and then it's there's the dress code, there's the rules, there's the living situations, there's when you were there for the first, I believe, 2 months, you weren't allowed to talk to anybody other than staff and a few select, very senior students of tenure at the school on their way out, essentially. They called it bands. You were on bands with everyone, and you couldn't even look them in the eye. And if you did, you would I believe, obviously you get a reprimand, and then from there, they would put you on what they called a program. And a program would be where you'd sit on a desk in a room, and you'd be on bands with everybody except one person, one staff member, and you'd be given assignments. You would not go to school. There was all these things, like you would just get your work there. Luckily, I never got on a bad program, but again, if you struggle on the program, they put you on what they called a stump. And a stump was where they had like a tree that was cut down, and you had to dig the stump out of the ground. It was just sort of labor work, right? So, and obviously you don't know all this right when you start, but you start to pick up on things like this. You learn that there's something called, I forget what it was called, but it was like it was the disciplinary committee, which was student run, like similar to other schools, but they called crews. That's what it was. And a crew essentially was the group, everyone that was on a program or someone that got some sort of reprimand was given a crew. And looking back, it's funny, like it was kind of cool, but in the moment it was punishment. You essentially would be in charge of cleaning the entire campus at night. So after dinner, the crews would then change into athletic clothing. And then you essentially always had to be running. So even if in place, you'd be chopping your feet. And like, so if you were wiping down a table in the dining hall, you had to like be either running or chopping your feet. They would have, water coolers at each of the buildings. So you had to like run the big water jugs to each building, heavy, run the trash down to the dumpsters, dust and clean, whatever it might be. But, so you'd be given a crew. So another disciplinary action, but it was all very physical based. And, I actually, ironically enough, enjoyed that stuff, right? So I actually was a part of the disciplinary committee towards the end of my tenure there. But, these are just things that, you look back on, and you don't know it when you walk in there, but it's overwhelming, right? It was a co-ed school, but obviously no intermingling between male females, and you heard stories, so like the what ifs, right? Like if you really broke a big rule, they'd send you back to the woods, and that happened. And so I just remember like on day one walking up, and they were sewing on a stump, like digging a stump out of the ground, is sort of ominous, But then you walked into the building, and you saw people talking and laughing, just kids being kids, and in their late teens reading books. And then you looked over and you saw the program. Everyone sitting there like couldn't even look at anyone. Again, another ominous sort of like, what's happening here? And it was just all very overwhelming, and from a stimulus perspective, and you just had no idea what to expect. And as I went through this, as I went through my time at Carlbrook, I think I often ask myself, was it something that really affected me and changed my life? Well, of course it did. It was 2 years of my life. And it was very heavily therapeutic. And so this is something that I do think it has helped me to this day. I think some of it was, I don't know if it was necessary, but it really opened up my eye from a perspective of not only myself, and it definitely helped, but also perspective of others. We would sit 3 days a week for 2 hours after school. So school was on campus. Everything was self-enclosed. So you had social workers, you had therapists, and then you also had all teachers. And then we would sit in a room, and you'd have one of the therapists leading this, and you'd sit in a circle. I believe they called it Milan style of therapy, where you were in a circle. And then what would happen would be you would be sitting down, and then the leader would sort of lead the discussion based off what they were talking about, because they all had case files on all of us, so they knew stuff. And sometimes people would be prepped to share something similar, very similar if you've been to even any from the little that I know about other type of AAs or other support groups, similar to that style of just sharing. But this was very pointed. And what I mean by that is so for example, if I was sitting next to someone, but I wanted to address an issue, it was also about assertive communication. If I was unhappy with how somebody treated me that day, I would have to stand up, walk across the circle, someone would then replace someone. They would go sit where I sat, so then I could sit directly across. And then your body language would have to be open. You put your hands on your lap with your palms up, open shoulders, right? So they're very all about body language too, about not crossed up and arms crossed, things like that. And then you'd address, and then the therapist would either let things go or things like that, and things would get and then they would do their job of picking and digging and getting to root causes of emotional discrepancies between two people. Usually it started with one person, and that's where it went down to. Then other people, because of the vulnerability in the circle, the other people would start to share. And it was a lot. I mean, the things that I heard about from people sharing it, even to this day, it gives me goosebumps. It makes me sad. It's something that it's a lot to be aware of, and that's why most people choose to either push it down for them personally, and that's why most people don't like to hear about it, with others, because it's difficult. But and then and we're also talking as you go through the journey in Carlbrook. I mean, there was 5 workshops. See if I can remember. There was Integritas, Amaketia, Animus, Teneo, and Veneratio. Okay. And that's pretty good. It's over a decade ago, right? So those are all Latin words too. So for those that are more intelligent than me listening, that, you understand what some of those means, like integrity and the celebrating life and trust and honor, things like that. Friendship. And you would learn, so they were very intensive, very physical. They would teach you physical ways to release, anger or unhappiness. And it was very intense, very loud. They would teach you things. I mean, things that it's almost hard to describe. You wouldn't believe, we would be in our own little, workshop room, very secluded area. So, and you'd go for early nights, early mornings, late nights, all day, doing a lot of stuff, from journaling to physical learning, how to, physical release of feelings and things like that, to sharing music and just things like that to really get you in certain moods. And looking back, it's, if you were to ever be an outsider looking in, I think it would be probably one of the strangest things. But I think you would also be like, there's some, like, listening, be some serious stuff going on there. They did a good job at creating an environment of trust, but also, like, getting out what they wanted, and there was at points where I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. Really, there was no right or wrong, but you always have that notion. But you would learn different tools on how to deal with, your past and your struggles and things like that. So those things would also, come up about, throughout the 2 years, and also increase the level of, I guess, efficacy of the smaller therapy groups. But I think I don't often talk about that, because most people, not many people have ever been through anything like that, and it's also something that is hard to understand. But if you were to think about, and they did a good job at sort of progressing it. Like, the first one was a day, but then the last one was 5 days, right? So you would progress it in your ability to handle more and more. Like many things that we know is that progressive building up of difficulty there, and also, awareness and getting you ready to leave, right? So there was a lot of that, sort of like getting you ready to be aware of what triggers were, what your past was, because everyone's a little different, right? So I wasn't, much into doing drugs, but a lot of people were. So being aware of those things, but what were my triggers? Everyone's vice is a little different, but you have to be aware, and awareness is super important. But beyond that, it was a normal school. If you can get back to normality after that description, like, yeah, we would go to school. We would, there would be classes. They were just all like in mods. They were like sort of like mobile, because it was temporary. They were building a school at the point. It was a relatively new school. So you would just go to your social studies class. You go to your science class. You do that. They had a little gym, which of course writing on the wall. Like, I lobbied to get the gym open more. There were fields we could play, things like that. But it was very different from the sense of, there were the strict rules of you couldn't have any identity. What I mean by that is, like, anything that you, like, think about how you dress, how you wear makeup, how you do anything. They stripped all of that. It was just, you wore, like, I wore a tie and a coat every day, and the girls had a similar dress code. No one was allowed to wear makeup. You couldn't listen to music on your own. Like, it was, in your bedroom, you had to, every morning you had to get your room checked off by a proctor. You had to make your bed, be able to bounce a quarter off it, fold in the edges. Your closet had to be equally spaced for the, with one finger or two fingers, depending on how many hangers you had. Your drawers needed to be perfectly folded. We learned how to roll and fold things so it looked beautiful. You could stack everything. Everything was. There was a little bit of sort of, again, for lack of me actually going through it, but very sort of militant feel to it. And some of the instructors were former military, and you could feel that in there. You had to iron your shirts every morning. But there's a dining hall. You'd go and eat and all that stuff, and it was. So it was a boarding school, but there was a lot more to it. And that was my fourth high school, in 4 years. And when I graduated from Carlbrook, essentially in December, I think is what it was. So, and that was technically 6 months late, right? So I was 6 months past where I normally would have graduated. And, and then you go through the application process to go to college, and I applied to college, and I actually got in. And all right. Sorry about that, gang. I got a little interrupted, but hopefully I can piece it back together. But, in summary, as I kind of look back, it's, and I'll touch a little more on it in the next episode. We're about 20 minutes in, but that really did shape a lot, and it really did shape my first year of college, which was, and I was, coming in half a year late. So there's a lot there, but an experience that not many people have. The school actually no longer exists, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But going from the woods, which was 2 months, to 2 years in therapeutic boarding school, it absolutely shaped who I am today. It again was not the end all be all. It was not the final step. I had more mistakes to make, again, sadly, but it shaped who I am and why I behave the way I behave nowadays. So this is something that I really appreciate sharing with you guys. Hopefully some of it resonates and whether helps you how to connect with your kids, but understand, now that I have a kid, a way different perspective, but working on writing a book about some of my learnings throughout my life. I don't know. I always go back and forth if there's going to be any value to it, but I'm inspired to do it, so I'm going to do it. And whether 5 people or 5 million people read it, for me, it matters a little less. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. This is episode 3 of The Life Story. On the Soapbox. Appreciate it.